Now it's out to questions. Go ahead.
You said the federal government steps in with subsidies. You said there are rebates. Where do the rebates come from?
Okay, so the rebates are utility driven. So each utility has its own rebate program. So in California, there's this new program called CSI, Solar California Initiative. There, the program is designed to benefit early adopters. So the earlier you adopt the solar system, the higher the rebate. So often I get customers saying, you know, the cost of solar technology has come down quite aggressively over the last year. Would I be better off just waiting another year or going solar now? The cost has come down, but the net cost to the consumer hasn't changed much at all. And the reason being is over the last year, the rebate has also dropped. And it's about a 10-cent difference. So it's actually a small you wouldn't have benefited if you waited in California, as the rebate and the system cost drop were at parity, or very close. In states like Arizona, they have decent rebates. Oregon, which is our other market, by the way, sunny Oregon. There they have a rebate program, plus they have a state incentive of 50%. So we were able to sell solar systems at around 7 cents a kilowatt hour in Oregon, as we're in PG&E territory, our solar systems come at about 22, 23 cents a kilowatt hour. And we have less production per kilowatt. Go ahead.
My question then is, looking at the market, your typical average, whatever, customer is how many dollars a month before they get your installation?
So repeat the question
so
saying everybody else can hear.
The question is demographics or typical customer.
So our typical customer in California needs to be in the tier 3 bracket. So for those who don't know, PG&E, actually most of California, has different tiers for electricity. So you have tier 1 and tier 2 is essentially your baseline. And then tier 3 is a big increase, tier 4 is even bigger, and tier 5 is massive. So it starts off at 11 cents per kilowatt hour, and tier 5 is at 42 cents per kilowatt hour. So there's a big range. And the more you use, the more expensive it is. There are states, believe it or not, that the more you use, you get a discount, which that drives me nuts. So the more you use, the more expensive it is. If you want to see a savings, you have to be in tier 3 and tier 4. But we do have a lot of customers that don't mind paying $10 or $15 more a month for clean power. So that typically is our demographic.
Is that also typical for the 50,000?
No, it's more like 30,000. Yeah.
I have two questions. One, will you do tractors, like the 2-axle tractors to increase the efficiency? And if not, would you consider using some latest technology of inverter to get the system to be more efficient?
Yeah, just to repeat the question, so there's two questions. One is, will you look at tracking systems for a solar system to increase the production? That's question one. Question two, will you look at other technology associated with the inverter to improve production? Tracking systems, I'm skeptical about tracking systems. And I'll tell you why. 2 years ago, panels were sold for about $4 a watt. That was the market price. Today, it's around $2.50 a watt. 2 years ago, tracking systems made a lot of sense because for every kilowatt hour you could maximize, you'd save a lot in not needing to buy those additional kilowatts. But your support and maintenance fees go up. One nice thing about solar systems is there's no moving parts. You just put it there, and in certain areas you don't even need to keep it clean. It keeps it clean itself. Mine doesn't. Depends. Our customers actually, I'll get to that in a second, but let me let me answer that question. So with the additional tilt and production gain, that conversion point starting to occur. It's still cheaper, and it's still better return to install a tracking system today. I'm skeptical that it will be a long-term solution. And the other part is the owning and operating of that tracking system. There's no long-term history on it. So you're dealing with moving devices in severe weather conditions over a 25-year period. I think if it's such a close call, I'm skeptical about that. On the inverters, we've actually spent a fair amount of time here. There's been a big trend on what they've been calling AC panels. So panel technology comes out in DC, and then it goes through the inverter and gets converted into alternating current. The industry's weak spot is the inverter. It's by far the #1 failing point. The panels in our history, we don't have panel failure. It just never occurs. What you have is inverter failure. So you have to go out and replace the inverter. So we've deployed AC inverters, and quite a bit of them. And we find that all inverters, the AC and the little inverters and the big inverters, have about a 10% failure rate. So it's fairly high.
Per year?
It's actually a bell curve. So it's just in the beginning. And then once it's gone through the first 6 months of burning in, it tends not to fail. But of those first 6 months, we have about a 10% failure rate. So it's very high.
May I ask what brand that barrier?
So this is great. We actually tested all the brands. And when we negotiated with our vendors, the vendors always say, no, we're the primo brand. Our quality is the greatest and greatest. And we looked at it, really? Well, if I had your stats against this guy, it's exactly the same. So all of them are around the same. They're all the same. Now, there's no effect to the customer, because all that happens is we see the event, the customer experiences maybe 2 days of downtime. We go out there, replace it, everything's fine.
I guess I'm one of the lucky ones. I have 18 kilowatt installed in 2005, and nothing happened. All I have to do is I have to clean the solar panels.
Yeah, see, that's most of our customers. That's 90% of them.
And then there are no solarcity, so we have sun power, solar.
You're in deep trouble now.
What's the cost installed today per kilowatt?
So for a homeowner, you're probably looking at about $6.50 to $7 per watt, or 6,500, 7,000 per kilowatt, pre-subsidies. So depending on your rebate size, net gets reduced, but just your gross amount is around $6.50 to $7 a watt.
So you quoted the prices for panels, but a significant fraction of the cost is the sort of balance of system. I guess it's the combination of the inverters and how much trenching and wiring and attaching the cells to something. Is there any prospect for that side of the cost to come down?
Absolutely. So the biggest prospect for that is scale. So getting efficiency throughput is amazing what it does to your cost of goods. SolarCity was not profitable in the beginning of the year because we had low throughput. With high throughput, we're profitable. So what happens is you have your fixed part of cost of goods that if you push more volume through it, it just increases your gross margins. That's the biggest cause for reduction in the balance of the system cost, including installation. Then smaller reasons for balanced system cost reductions is just addressing the single component. So looking at the mounting equipment, can you create your own mounting equipment at a lower cost? Will that improve crew efficiency? The other efficiency is by implementing technology to make sure that you always have the right materials in the warehouse. I know this sounds like a simple task, but it's not. You often have your crew lead racing down to Home Depot to get some components. When he's going down that route, often the crew is stopped. So then that causes an efficiency loss. The psyche of an installer, if he looks at the schedule and sees that he's got work for the entire month, he works fast. If he looks at the schedule and sees he's got work for the next 3 days, he works a little slower. Go ahead.
How about here?
So you mentioned that your customer payments only account for about 20% of the cost of the total system, is that right? So if you scale up considerably, aren't you a little worried that maybe the government might decide to scale back on some of these subsidies? It's going to start costing them a lot of money.
Very good point. This is actually an interesting comment. Today, solar is a subsidized market. It does not work without subsidies. Let's be clear there. Even with subsidies in places like California, the cost per kilowatt hour for residents is coming around 22 cents a kilowatt hour. So that's still very high. The grid power, they're buying at 5 or 6 cents per kilowatt hour. The ITC, the tax credit, has been around it's been extended for 8 years. So the industry has 8 years to figure out scale and reduction to get to that point. So there's two things that are going to happen. One, the cost of power is going to come, the cost of solar power is going to come down. And the second is the cost of power is going to go up. And we're hoping that's less than 8 years. We really hope. But to that point, I just recently read a study about subsidies for renewable energy and for fossil fuels. And I've always heard rumor mill about fossil fuels get a lot of subsidy. This is the first study actually quantified and broke it down. So here's the actual number. Fossil fuel over the last 6 years got 76 billion in federal subsidies. Renewable power got 29 billion in federal subsidies. And renewable meaning everything, wind, biomass, solar, all forms of renewable. So don't ask me why we're still subsidizing coal.
Solar only got 1 billion with the set of solar power introduction.
Yeah, but this is over the last 6 years for all renewables. The study didn't break down solar versus wind or any of the others. But it's the point is just fossil fuels got more than double of renewable.
Okay, so I saw one back here somewhere, and then we'll wander over to this side.
Just a quick question about your business model. So who assumes the liability? What is the liability side? Warranty, because the system has been working for 10 years. Is it you or is it the manufacturer? Who assumes that?
So all liability, warranty, everything falls into us. So this is our system. We own it. Oh, let me be clear. We have a lot of customers that buy cash. And in that case, it's just a manufacturing warranty associated with the equipment. We have a 10-year service obligation to that customer. For all systems that are leased, those are our systems. So anything that goes wrong, it's our responsibility. And we will lean on the panel manufacturer or the inverter to honor their warranties if something goes wrong with their equipment.
Let's see now. Let me do this in some sort of fair order. I saw one back over in the back there somewhere. Maybe not.
No,
How
that
about
was
here?
great, but the question was answered about the subsidies.
Fair enough. How about here?
Do you see your mechanism being employed in other countries? Is it viable today to do that in?
Absolutely. You face the same problems everywhere. So it's really important to get scale into this business. The largest market in the world, as you all know, is Germany. And their residential market is actually not so big. Their residential market's fairly small. So what we find slightly different is it's easy to go upscale, it's hard to come downscale. So our company operates profitably just on a residential business, and then the commercial business is just incremental. If you just depend on commercial, it's very difficult to manage a business because it's spiky. As where residential tends to be a formula. You spend X amount in marketing, you get X close rate, conversion rate, and adoption. And you can forecast that. But I do think it can scale worldwide.
What are the prospects for expansion of your company to other states aside from the ones that you've mentioned so far?
So we did what we call our own solar affordability index. And we looked at those, the ingredients we looked at there are slightly different. So how much sun exposure is in that state? What's the cost of power? And then what's the subsidy level? Looking at those 3 ingredients, there are 14 states that have better economics than California. So we plan to expand to about 6 new states next year, and probably another 6 after that, as the market's ready. A lot of these states, their solar program, and why they're unfamiliar to this group, is their solar programs are very specific. So some of them will have no system larger than 10 kilowatts. So you don't hear of the, what was that bad word you said earlier? Oh, she left, SunPower. You don't hear of the large integrators like SunPower, because SunPower arguably is the largest solar integrating company in the US. But they do megawatt systems. Most of those states won't work for them, because it's just it's too small a program.
How about there? I think I saw that one next.
Can you tell us more details about the tax credit equity with the bank that you mentioned at the beginning?
Sure. So this is different than just pure debt. When raising tax equity, what they're buying is essentially this tax credit. So you have to establish a partnership where the legal entities have the rights to own the system and then pass the tax benefits onto whatever corporation, let's say Bank A. That structuring is very complicated and very expensive. Our first tax equity deal that we did, just the legal costs cost $1.2 million. Just legal cost. I'm convinced the lawyers make sure that it stays complicated. That's just my personal feeling. Oh, this is the most complicated thing out there. Absolutely. Although we've done it 50 times, this is really, really complicated. It's going to cost you $200,000–$300,000 to do this. And so if they tell everybody that, they keep it going. That's just my theory. It may actually really be complicated. But since then, average transaction cost is about $200,000 or $300,000 for every fund that you establish, in making sure that all the entities are legal and that it works. So you don't face any tax recapturing issues. Because if you get the tax credit, you've got to make sure that the structure doesn't collapse and that the IRS doesn't come back and grab back that tax credit. Here's a common flaw in that. You often see a solar lease. When we launched solar lease, there were a bunch of little competitors that launched too. And they were not operating leases. They were finance lease. And a big test is what is the buyout value at the end? If the person is offering you for $1, I'd be highly skeptical, because then it's a finance lease instead of an operating lease. The buyout value has to be fair market value.
So one back here, and then we'll go down here, and then from there.
Yeah. Isn't it true that you produce more energy than you consume? That PG&E does not pay you for that difference? And if it is true, why is that? So
it's a mixed answer. The answer is it was true. There's now the PSC has now approved that the utilities will pay you back. They haven't finalized on the price yet, but the outcome will most likely be at wholesale. So today, when you sell to the utility, you net metering your meter. So you're essentially selling it back to utility at retail. For the overproduction, historically, it's been you just give that to the utility. There's a lot of momentum now in California where the overproduction, you'll get paid for it. The pricing is still up for debate.
How many manufacturers are you dealing with? What kind of contract exclusivity do you have with them?
Yeah, we've actually dealt with almost all of them. But today, our primary panel manufacturers is Evergreen and First Solar. We've chosen them, one, because they're made in the US, and two, both those are environmentally very friendly panels. With that being said, it is getting difficult to stay strictly with them, as a lot of the Chinese panel manufacturers, their quality is improving, and their cost is coming down a lot. So it's something that we will have to consider.
So one down here and over here, and then one back there.
It looks like we do, from an engineering standpoint, you're essentially putting a lot of small units on houses in a community, but it's really part of a network. So the energy flows in all directions in reality. Wouldn't it be, I mean, I'm just looking at the economy of scale to say, look, we got 100 houses want this. We can put all those panels on a Costco warehouse where we have much better control, we have economy of scale, you know, the inverters it just makes a lot more sense. I mean, this is the only reason an individual house is apparently political as far as I can figure, from an engineering point of view.
Well,
it's not really benefiting that house too much because it's transparent to the owner.
Sure, because it actually does meter back, but may benefit the next door neighbor's house. If you could do systems in community areas, absolutely, that could make sense. If you had a Costco or whatever warehouse and homes surrounding it, you could do that.
Well, the homes have surrounded because it's all on the grid anyway. The cost to transmit that far is nothing.
Sure, but why wouldn't that power be applied to the Costco building itself? So let's just use your warehouse concept. Costco uses a lot of power. So wouldn't that power first be consumed by Costco?
It's consumed by whoever consumes it, but the assumption here is there's more power being created than is being consumed. It's being pumped into the grid. It makes more sense to put all in one location. Rather than a lot of little houses, we have all these different roofs, you got all these different supports, you got all these different inverter problems, all these different wiring, everything else. If you can just gang it up in one big bug.
So that works if you have the space available. In most of the areas that we serve, you don't, because even in the buildings with big fat roofs, they have high consumption. So if you were to put a solar system there, they would consume that power as well. So there is no exporting availability, unless that's an empty warehouse. And there are some of those warehouses, especially down south. But over here, where would you install it?
I think I saw one down here.
Yeah, what is the gross margin? Is it still negative? Or?
No, gross margin, we're making money. Coming from software, the gross margin is relatively small. So the average gross margin is around 20 to 30%.
What percentage of that goes to Morgan Stanley?
That's net of Morgan Stanley's. That's our gross margin. Yeah.
You borrowed $100 million, right?
It wasn't borrowed. They invested it, so there's no debt.
So it seems like the utility is getting a direct gain as this model grows larger, in that its load curve is getting flatter, like there's less need for peaking. Is that monetized at all in the current system?
So that's the solar industry's position, is that we should be compensated for the peak value of our electricity versus just the standard value of the electricity. The utilities, depending on which utilities you speak to, they have a different opinion. With that note, our utility, PG&E, is actually one of the best utilities to work with and has been most supportive for solar than any other, than most of the other utilities.
That's the Overland side.
To this gentleman's point here, isn't net metering what's limiting these big box stores from really populating their roofs?
So if you add in a feeding tariff to these big roofs, then it is a different selling proposition. Then your selling proposition to the big box is, I'll rent your roof, and in return, I get to install solar systems, and my income comes from the feeding tariff, however it is structured. But I want to caution that feeding tariff, Germany is the largest market in the world, and the reason for their adoption is the feeding tariff. Feeding tariff program, are you guys familiar with what a feeding tariff is? Okay, so with a California law, you can only, your solar system can only produce power for the meter that it serves. So if you have a big building and it goes through 1 meter, whatever that meter's, whatever it moves back, that's all that the power can serve. So if it uses 100 kilowatt hours and you install a system that produces 120 kilowatt hours, those 20 kilowatt hours just get lost. That's net metering. So you only meter that meter. A feeding tariff, and it's also net of your consumption. So it first goes into the building. If the building is not consuming the power, then it moves out. So it's on the customer side of the meter. A feeding tariff is where you're not selling to the customer, you're selling to the utility. So it's on the utility side of the meter. So it can be the same installation, except you're tying over here instead of over here. And then by tying over here, you actually don't even impact the customer's electric usage, as you're just feeding directly into the grid. And then the utility is paying you per kilowatt hour. That can work. It doesn't exist. There's a lot of momentum behind feeding tariffs. It's not the solution. So it's a careful balance. So they launched this feeding tariff in Spain. The incentive for the feeding tariff was too rich. Within 1 year, they did 2.5 gigawatts of solar. All of the US last year did, I think, around 400 megawatts. So in 1 year, a version market did 2.5 gigawatts. This year, they're doing 500 megawatts. So for any business there, they are hurting right now. Because I don't know about you, but when you ramp up and then you have to ramp down, that really sucks. So when designing the feeding tariff, it's a very difficult program to do because you have to make sure that it's not too rich, but at the same time, not too poor. And I'll take it back. California actually does have a feeding tariff. It's at 15 cents a kilowatt hour. We've had it for about a year, just a little over a year and a half. Not 1 kilowatt's been installed because it just doesn't make financial sense.
Yeah, what about the power purchase agreement? Isn't that a poor man's feed-in tariff?
So the power purchase agreement is a power purchase agreement between the system owner and the building owner. So it's nothing to do with the utility.
PG&E has a power purchase agreement, buyback.
Oh, okay. So this you're talking about a large PPA where the utility gets into the PPA with the provider.
It comes in at like 30 kilowatts. I forget the exact limits. Where you?
No. So let's be clear. So there's 2 different types of power purchase agreements. There's one where you hear the big announcements where PG&E may close a 200 megawatt deal with Abengoa to install a large solar thermal system. They're taking tax credits and they're coming up with a customized price. The price is not disclosed. It's a customized price. So that's utility scale PPAs. Business scale PPAs, you're selling the power to the customer, not to the utility. And the customer's getting the power from you, applying that power to their building. If their building is not using the power, then it's moving the meter backwards.
Okay, but on the PG&E/tariffs, there is a section for power purchase agreement with like 10 or 15-year contract periods at rates varying between like 9 cents and 21 cents a kilowatt hour.
No, you think I'd know about that, but I don't. So I'm not familiar with that. Sure.
What is your position on BIPV and like new house building? Do you like try to get in this market?
So do you guys all know what BIPV is? So it's building integrated PV. So the primary benefit is aesthetics. In fact, that's probably the only benefit. Would you agree? Yeah, it's probably the only benefit is aesthetics. I see a lot of hope for it. A large barrier to adoption is aesthetics. BIPV, however, is just so grossly expensive that even consumers that want it, when you give them the two options, they take the non-BIPV just because it's so expensive.
So what will be your solution to address those cities with all high rises and no flat and low houses, where you can mount your rooftop panels?
This is not the application. Solar will never get there. It's just, we work well, or solar works well, but we need surface area. Even at 100% efficiency, it still wouldn't work. And we're not going to get to 100% efficiency.
You probably signed several non-disclosure agreements about technologies that are not available to customers yet in terms of panel efficiency and so forth. Are we, so I won't ask you to violate those, of course, unless you want to, but are we basically looking at a pretty slow, gradual, decade level of improvement, or do you think there are going to be some step functions that will help us get more efficient sooner?
Can't tell you. No, just kidding. I'm hoping for the step functions. I think reality would be just constant improvement, so slow steps. So I don't see this big leap occurring. The big leaps will occur in efficiency, but it's not going to happen with cost.
I have a question back on inverters. Have you compared the local DC to DC to boost solution and a central inverter with the microinverter solution versus the standard central inverter solution? Have you compared those three options, and what are your thoughts on them?
So let me understand the question correctly. So you're thinking microinverters behind the panel that takes the DC to AC. That's option one. Then you have microinverters, which aren't really inverters. They actually just keep it at DC, but they do more of the maximum point tracking. So more like the Magic device. Is that the one you're thinking of? And then the final one is just the plain old inverter. Okay, so just technology-wise, just once again, I'm not a technologist, so don't go too deep into this. If you want that, get the other founder, Peter. The three different ways, you have your AC inverter, which is a small inverter that sits behind the panel. There's a well-known company is called Enphase that does that. Then you have another inverter. Well, not really inverter, it's just a device that sits behind the panel that tracks the best performance of the panel based on shading and sunlight conditions. But it's still in DC. It still runs through and then eventually connects into a final inverter. And then you get the standard inverter. We've tested all three. Enphase, at least not Enphase, the AC inverter has a lot of promise, but because we are the system owners, we just want to give it a little more time. As if you have 10% failure, which is the historical average, and you have 10 panels, you're guaranteed to do a truck roll to that house again. So that means we roll in a truck to every house twice, guaranteed. So until we have strong data that's not the case, we're going to give it a little time. With the device that just tracks the DC aspect to its maximum potential, that's good. But right now, the electricity benefit is lower than the cost. So it doesn't make sense to do it. And then the standard inverters, you know what you're getting. The companies are fairly stable, and they can honor their warranties. So that's the place where we are today. But it's definitely not the place we're going to stay.
We'll do one more, and then we'll say goodbye to the big group and handle a few more. One more.
What about the cleaning? I always have to clean my panels.
Have you guys tracked? I encourage you to track the difference between cleaning your panels and not cleaning it.
It's dust on it, I drop about 15%.
So yours actually drops about 15. Okay, that's different. So the data that we have is about a 5% drop.
But my panels are fairly flat.
Okay, that's the big difference. So most of our customers have.
We don't get any rain, so it doesn't rain all summer.
That's right. It doesn't rain in the summer. Which is great about California in some aspects. When we do the designs for our customers, we build in dust and dirt into the production estimates. A lot of our customers who are tilted correctly don't need to clean their panels. It's still, they get a better performance if they do clean it, no doubt about it. But we build into our production guarantees that they don't have to. In certain areas. In other areas, you have to. Just got to spray it down.
Well, please join me in thanking them.